church. We're in John chapter 20. Next slide. I prepared a couple of versions of this sermon, but since it's just family, I'm going to give you the real McCoy. If you Google Church of Christ, anybody done that recently? Well, if you Google Church of Christ, as most of you are probably aware, Google has what they call predictive search feature, where you start typing and they try to figure out what you're looking for. And the way they do that is they use what is the most commonly searched for phrases in association with whatever you typed in first. So if you type in Church of Christ and then a space, the next thing that pops up is cult. And some of you guys are rolling your eyes and groaning a little bit, and that's okay. It's okay for us to just admit what's out there and deal with it. I don't know where this began, this particular line of thinking, but several weeks ago, it probably hadn't been that many weeks ago, maybe a week ago, I started watching a Netflix documentary on David Koresh and the events that took place in Waco, and I could only watch a little piece of it, and then I had enough. Because I think that kind of thing, and I've got a couple of others up there. Most of you are familiar with Jim Jones, and you guys remember Marshall Applewhite? Does that guy ring a bell? Well, you remember the comment, the Hale Bopp comment and all that? Yeah. So you never know when to pop, a joke on something like that. Is it too soon? Kind of a thing. I'm trying not to pop jokes about things like that. Though some of those jokes have become common nomenclature in our culture. For instance, you hear, in fact, in a corporate culture, I hear somebody make the statement every now and again, well, what? Yeah, they've drank the Kool-Aid, right? So, well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from the Jim Jones event, and so after a while, events like that kind of are weaved into our social dialogue. But in fact, initially I had thought, I want to write an article about this phenomenon where you type in Church Christ and you see the word cult. And then I decided, no, I'm not going to write an article. I'll just weave it into this sermon. So here's the thing. I talked with my young adults this morning, about this question. What is a cult? And it depends somewhat on who's using the phrase. For instance, one of the definitions that I read online about the word cult is in many circles, the word cult is just applied to any religious group that teaches something I don't agree with, right? So that's not a bad observation, right? In fact, and so have you, heard the word cult applied that way many, many times. But if you really dig into the real meaning of the term, and I know this is kind of a negative tone intro, so it's going to get better after this, I promise. But if you dig into the real meaning of the term, the idea behind a cult revolves around at least two major things. One of them is that the cult is a relatively small group or one individual that excessively controls its members. Okay? You guys tracking with me? And the other one is that it requires unwavering, unquestioning devotion. So, if you are in, and by the way, I haven't checked to see if this is legit, but if it's not, it should be, that any other religious organization out there could be a cult as well. Are there churches, so here's where it gets difficult. Are there churches of Christ out there that are cults? Absolutely. If they excessively control their members, if there is a human being involved in excessive, or a group of human beings involved in excessively controlling their members, and if you are punished for questioning or deviating from the instructions that you're given by the human leadership, then whether you want to admit it or not, you are in a cult. Okay? And so one of the things that we talked about in our group this morning with the young adults is my encouragement to ask the difficult questions. Ask questions. And if they're, you know they're good questions if they make people uncomfortable. Ask questions about, is baptism necessary for salvation? Has anybody ever been in a Bible class where somebody raised their hand and asked a question like that about baptism, and is baptism necessary for salvation? And there was like this, right? Well, why are we uncomfortable? What do we have to worry about when somebody wants to ask a question about one of our deeply held doctrines or deeply held philosophical points? You know, why does it make us nervous? What do we have to lose to have an environment open enough to where anybody can challenge and say, I'm not sure I want to buy into that. Prove that to me. Well, I mean, are we so unsure of our doctrinal stance that we're terrified to have it put under scrutiny? Is that our concern? Why are we afraid for somebody to raise their hand and ask a question challenging one of our deeply held philosophical or doctrinal concepts? And the truth of the matter is, I honestly have no idea. I don't. I'm going to skip the rest of that. Next slide, we'll jump into the. So this actually began as the first of a two-parter. Andrew's going to do the other piece on the resurrection and getting ready for Easter and all of that. But and I know this doesn't sound like your typical Easter thing, but it will morph into an Easter message here momentarily. Just watch. I want to do this because I think it is absolutely imperative, especially for my younger listeners. I want you to embrace this idea that real biblical faith is very messy business. I'm not talking about just lining up with the Church of Christ dogma and walking like the Church of Christ tells you to walk. I'm talking about stepping out of that and developing a real faith of your own. And when you do that, life is absolutely not going to get easier. One of the reasons that people gravitate to cults is because in a cult, you don't have to do your own thinking. They will feed you all the thoughts that you need to have. But when you step into real biblical faith, what you're going to find is that life becomes extremely messy. And it becomes extremely difficult to determine whether or not the other people that you run around with really have real biblical faith, because real biblical faith looks different in Tim Renfro than it does in John Dennis. If you haven't seen this movie, and I certainly don't have time to unpack it, but you've got to watch if you want to. The movie, The Mission. It's an old movie. There's no car chases, Uzis. There's no special effects, no CG in it. So, that probably blows it for a lot of us. But it's just a phenomenal movie, and ultimately about two specific individuals whose faith takes them in completely different directions. And at the end of the movie, you have this sense they were at completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and they were both absolutely right, or at least you have this sense, right? Well, one of them, the priest in this movie, the kind of the head priest, yeah, he was a Jesuit. Still, it's just a fantastic movie. The Jesuit kind of lead priest ends up being, he's basically a pacifist. And the other priest was an ex-military guy, and he ends up taking up arms and fighting. And at the end of the movie, both of them did exactly what they were supposed to do. They followed their faith, and it took them in very, very different directions. And you say, well, I think being a pacifist is just goofy. Okay, that's your faith. But this priest, his faith took him in another direction. And it was so, it was just so beautiful. So, if you want to watch the movie The Mission, watch it. Real biblical faith is messy business. It refuses to lend itself to cookie-cutter thinking. What is our stance on marriage, divorce, and remarriage? What is our stance on the indwelling of the Holy Spirit? That is a stupid question. I mean, you're welcome to ask, because I'm talking about, an open environment where you can ask the questions you want to ask, but I'm here to tell you that that's not the real question. The real question is, what is your stance on that? Have you done your own study? Have you done your own thinking? I'm glad to line up some passages for you to look at. But ultimately, you've got to do your own thinking. You've got to do your own study, and you've got to draw your own conclusions, and for God's sake, stand on those conclusions. One of the problems with biblical faith, one of the problems with real biblical faith is there's no proof, there's just evidence. There's lots of evidence out there. Do you believe that Jesus was raised from the dead? Do you?
Yes.
I mean, that's really kind of a bizarre concept, isn't it? I mean, kind of ridiculous even. Yeah, it's just crazy ridiculous, actually. But I happen to be one of those people who believes that it is a historical fact that a Nazarene carpenter who was nailed to a cross on day one was physically resurrected from the grave on day 3. And that's my belief. And it's not my belief because somebody told me to believe this way. It's my belief because I have weighed the evidence. And I've come down to a place where I cannot make sense of the events that transpired thereafter without that having actually happened. That's my faith. You weigh the evidence and come to your own conclusion. But, whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist, whether you like it or not, at the end of the day, all you have is evidence. You have no proof. The evolutionist cannot prove his worldview any better than I can prove my worldview. And I can show you the evidence why I have the worldview that I have. All right. And this is probably the most important thing, and where this morphs into a Easter sermon, is real biblical faith always, if you don't hear anything else I say today, hear this. Real biblical faith always has its moments of intense doubt. It's just part of the faith process. It is. And I've had encounters. In fact, just a couple of years ago, I preached a sermon on this very topic out of Luke chapter 7. Where is it? It's on here somewhere. Luke chapter 7, where John the Baptist sends his disciples and puts their finger, these disciples, in Jesus' face and said, do you guys remember what they said? Are you the one, or are we looking for somebody else? Now that right there is a hard question. That's one of them. All these people rallying around Jesus, and this guy's the Messiah. And John the Baptist, the guy that put him in the water and brought him back up, sends his disciples to Jesus, puts their finger in Jesus' face and says, are you the one, or are we looking for someone else? I love that. I absolutely love it. Because it shows, and by the way, you know what Jesus said about John after that? He said, this is Luke chapter 7. He said, that rips it. I'll have nothing else to do with that guy John. No? Yeah, that's the new international version. No. Jesus says to the crowd, John Dennis's very rough paraphrase, there's never been a better man than John. What? And I preached this sermon a few years ago on this topic, and I talked about the fact that there's always going to be in the faith process, this messy faith process, there's always going to be those dark nights of the soul where we doubt and where we lose our footing, and I had this visitor take me back to the woodshed and wail on me about how dare you question the faith of John the Baptist. And I just read the passage. It's really not that complicated. John the Baptist had, and by the way, I'll just tell you this, you find me any hero in the Bible, Old Testament or New, and I will show you his Luke chapter 7, or her Luke chapter 7. They all have them. You know why they do? And you know why the Bible puts it out there? Because it's a common part of the faith process. Faith always has you stepping out into places that your intellect has nothing to stand on, and as soon as you do, you have this sinking feeling that you've stepped into nothing, right? Peter jumps over the edge of the boat, or even better than that, the little servant girl puts her finger in Peter's face and says, "Hey, I recognize that dialect. You're one of those Galileans." And he says, "By the gods of heaven, I'm not." Again, John Dennis's rough paraphrase. But if you're not allowed to question your faith, If you're not allowed to question your faith, there's something seriously wrong with your faith. I can tell you this, real biblical faith will hold up under any scrutiny that you give it. It will. So question. Ask the hard questions. All right, next slide. So this began as a sermon on Thomas. So what do you know about this guy Thomas? Anybody in here, can you guys write me a page and a half about Thomas, the Apostle Thomas? What? Yeah, well, yeah. That's, so, he's best known. In fact, his name has become synonymous with doubt. Right? And why is his nickname Doubting Thomas? Well, his nickname is Doubting Thomas. This in John chapter 20, starting in verse 24, and I'm just going to read this for a second. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus. Do you know what Didymus means? Anybody in here? Anybody in here Didymites? Didymus means twin. So, and also, by the way, in Aramaic, the word Thomas means twin. So there is, some possibility that Thomas had a brother that looked just like him, or a sister, maybe. We don't know. We really don't know much about this guy Thomas. I think it's funny that his parents said, "What are we going to name him?" I can't think of any. Let's just call him Twin, because there's another one in the set. Wonder what they Twin 2 or something. Now Thomas, also known as Twin, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came the first time, discussed in the verses above. But so the other disciples told him, "Hey, we've seen the Lord." And he said to them, "Oh, I doubt that," right? Doesn't use the word doubt. He just says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." So what's he doing? He just wants the same evidence that the other people had. That's all he's asking for. By the way, I mentioned the other Gospels mention this guy, but he doesn't speak in any of the other Gospels. He speaks 3 times. He speaks 3 times in the Gospel of John. In John chapter 11, where Jesus says, "Hey, let's go. Lazarus has passed away. Let's go raise him from the dead," basically. And you remember what Thomas said? He said, "Come on, guys, let's go with him so we can die with him." Well, why didn't he get Thomas the Braveheart as a moniker there, right? Why do we focus, we generically, human beings and religious human beings in particular, why do we focus on the fact that Thomas said, "I'm not going to believe till I get evidence"? And the reason that we have problems with that is because we've been trained not to ask questions. We've been trained not to say, "Wait a minute, prove your case." But Thomas wasn't that guy. Thomas was a purist when it comes to faith. He said, "Hey, prove it." I love that. That is honest. Guys, that is so honest. Not just blindly, "Oh, okay, well, cool, guys. I wish I'd have been there." That's not what Thomas said. Thomas said, "I'm not going along with this until I see the evidence you guys have seen." By the way, the only other time that Thomas speaks that is recorded is in John chapter 14, and there he's asking another one of the coolest questions ever asked. Jesus says, when I go to prepare a place for you, you guys are going to come and be with me. And Jesus says, and where I go, you know the way. And Thomas is the one who said, wait a minute, I don't know what you're talking about. What way are you talking about? And then Jesus, of course, says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? But I love this guy Thomas. I absolutely love him. He is just pure. He, brave. Okay, if Jesus is going to raise Lazarus, let's go with him so we can die with him. I love that, and I love the fact that he just insists on getting evidence. I'm out of time. Instead of reading the rest of this, you guys know how it ends. Jesus comes in, has a conversation with Thomas. Thomas puts his finger in the holes in Jesus' hands, puts a finger in the side, hand in the side, and then the only, or at least the first, public declaration of the divinity of Jesus comes out of the mouth of Thomas. The first time that anybody says, this guy is God, came out of Thomas's mouth. He says, my Lord and my God. He says, show me the evidence. He got the evidence and he says, that's all I need. You are my Lord, you are my God. I'm not ever going to call this guy Doubting Thomas. I'm going to call him Thomas the Pure Heart or Thomas the Brave Heart or something. Because this guy understands that real biblical faith is evidence-based and is messy, messy business. I love it. All right, next slide. If I remember, this slide is, it's a long slide. I'm going to do these points quick because they're important. Your preconceived ideas will kill your faith. So, you need to pray on a regular basis. God, just get the preconceived stuff out of the way so I can see what's real, what's true. I have no idea what that second point was going to be. I obviously didn't finish it. Hey, there's probably a sermon there. I have no idea what it is. I want to read you a quote. It is difficult to say exactly what we believe because we are a very diverse group. We do not demand that you share our beliefs before attending. Do you know who wrote that? I did. It's on our core beliefs. It's the very first little section on our core beliefs on our website. I cannot tell you the kind of grief I've gotten over that little piece. And here's the thing. We don't want people thinking for themselves, man. There's no telling. No telling where they'll end up. If you turn them loose, let me tell you something. You go where your faith takes you. You go where your truth. No. There is no your truth. You go where truth takes you. You weigh the evidence, demand the evidence, weigh the evidence, and then go where truth takes you. Encourage people around you to think for themselves, to ask the hard questions. Let's see. Last bullet point, the Bible was written for skeptics, and it never condemns them. Mark chapter 9, verse 23, Jesus talking to the guy whose son is a demoniac, and he says, if you can save him, the father, if you can save him, save him. Jesus says, if you can. I love that statement. What? Who are you talking to? Jesus says, all things are possible to those who believe. And the guy says what? Do you remember? Yeah. He says, oh, I do believe. Well, help my disbelief. And Jesus just turns around and heals the boy. Oh, how's that for helping the guy's disbelief, right? Ask for evidence, God will give it. Lloyd C. Douglas, the writer of the book, the author of the book The Robe, and others, tells this story about when he was in college, living in a boarding house, and he would come down the stairs every day. I just love this. Just give me 2 more minutes. I know I'm way over, but he would come down the stairs every day, and there was an old music teacher in the room at the bottom of the stairs, and he was in a wheelchair, but still very, very sharp. And they had this little ritual they would do almost every day. So Lloyd Douglas would pop his head in the guy's door, and he would say, "Hey, what's the good news?" And the old teacher would say, the old music teacher, would grab a tuning fork, and he would whack the side of his wheelchair, and he would say, "What?" Oh. He would say, so what's the good news? Grabs a tuning fork, ping. He says, that is middle C. It was middle C yesterday. It'll be middle C 1,000 years from now. The piano upstairs is out of tune, and the tenor across the hall sings flat, but that is middle C. I'm going to tell you, truth is out there, to borrow X-Files. Find your middle C. Find your middle C. His name is Jesus the Christ. He is the way, the truth, the life. And ask the hard questions, and don't let anybody shame you for it. Alrighty.